It on? It's on. Okay. It's been a while since I've done this, maybe 6-7 years, so y'all be patient if I go out of order. This is not the order I'm used to. I'm trying to use this to go by. So we're going to do the invocation. Mike, if you wouldn't mind doing the invocation for us.
Sure, let's pray. Holy, loving God, the beautiful weather and the brisk air reminds us that your promises, as evidenced in the seasons, are continually true. Let us follow you. Let us be as one as we gather around this table, we share food and fellowship, and we are sent out to put service above self. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You may be seated. We have the starting it on. We have some guests over here. Table 1. Okay, just want to make sure. That's the only guest we have, I'm pretty sure, is on table 1. So I want to make sure of that. Some announcements. Edie, you got a big announcement.
The McAllister Foundation, I got a check out of the mailbox this morning for $4,000.
You need help tomorrow for that kind of thing?
Yeah, can I do that now?
Yeah.
A couple of the people that usually help for backpack cannot be there tomorrow. I need some help. There are just 2 of us there. Who could come and help backpack at 9:30 tomorrow morning? Take you 20 minutes after you get there. Thank you.
I'll try.
Thank you. That was really well. Okay, thank you. And can I do one more? The people I really needed to talk to are not here right now, but Daniel Epley is going to film the Rotary Readers people. We're going to try to do it in, we were going to do September, October, November, but September's going by. And then we're going to do 3 more and 3 more. We can't go in the building. Not even the parents can go in the building. But we still are working on Rotary readers. I wanted you to know that.
Okay. You want to go with the duck race, and then I'll go back to the...
Duck race, we have the tickets out. If you would, please turn them in. We have another 2 weeks.
May have a week. It's next Friday.
All right, a week. Next week. And I will say, what year did you turn the ducks over to me? Was it 11?
At least 11 or 12, somewhere in there.
All right, so we're going on 10 years, and my daughter, I'm going to walk around on the football field Friday night. This will be the first duck race I will have missed, and I won't be there Saturday. So I know we don't have a large enough group here, but we really need people to step up. If you would, there's a form that's going around to participate. If you would, please sign up to, and then I'll send out and push out a few more emails. I know it's going to be a big weekend, but the other discussion is we have the duck race in the river, and we have a duck race in the stream fountain, the fountain here. The river has always been a very positive, other than it takes a lot of work, and it takes kids and it takes everyone to get in the river. So the thought being with Main Street and Jonathan, if you would, if it would work, I know that some had suggested it, that from the stage we could announce that we're about to have the drawing at 3 o'clock, which could keep people involved and keep anyone that is from leaving and going down to the river, during the festivities. So we may do that this year.
Can do it in the fountain.
That's what I'm putting to you guys. I mean, and that's if you would like that as a portion of Squeeze on the Square.
Sounds good to me.
Done.
Like I said, I'm going out of order, but Jonathan, do you mind doing happy bugs for us?
Sure. All right, so I'm gonna give Edie a second to find her dollar. I'll start. I am happy that we do have Squealing on the Square coming back
thank goodness after last year. It'll be next Friday and Saturday, a lot of good times, so we're looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Angela, thank you for
Yes.
taking your.
Oh, okay.
Easy.
Keep it moving.
Thank you.
I'm happy the sheriff's here with us.
Yes, I'm happy to have him as well, Mike.
For the beautiful weather.
Yes, the weather is excellent, so happy.
Definitely have to swim on the squares.
I'm happy that I'm getting to watch my 8-year-old play soccer. So it was his first organized sport this year.
Excellent.
Good food. I'm happy to be back this week.
Good, we're happy to have you back too.
This fall,
Speaker and Chair.
Yes.
Pleasant weather.
Yes. Yes.
That's all of our guests today.
Happy to be sharing home with.
Thank you.
Glad for all this protection.
That's right. That's right. We are certainly safe up in here today.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bill, happy about another wonderful meal from Ray Stallings.
Yes, yes. Did you have
I do, yeah. Well, I'm happy my father-in-law loaned me $1.
Yeah. Is he expecting interest?
He might, I'll have to talk to my husband about that. And I was also happy to see my dear mother-in-law Jay today.
Yes.
Before we got together.
Happy for the beautiful weather.
All right, Rotary, what is this going to do?
Good in the world.
Thank you very much.
Done. I will bring up Phil to introduce our speaker today.
First of all, I'm happy to have as our guest Sheriff Reynolds and Chris Martin. They do such great work under the radar, and I especially wanted them to come to this program because that's what my daughter-in-law does. And I'm delighted to have my daughter-in-law Michelle here today. She and my son live in Columbia with two really fine young men. And of course, I know I'm partial, but I'm going to tell you, they are just exactly that. Got an 11th grader and an 8th grader. And Michelle grew up in Houston, Texas, and graduated from the University of Texas. She's a Longhorn. And went to Wake Forest Law School, finished Wake Forest, and then spent 3 years in JAG, and while she was in JAG, she had a tour in Hungary right before the Balkan War, and then was stationed at Fort Jackson, thankfully, and that's where she and my son Philip met, and she's such a wonderful part of our family. For the past 18 years, actually, she's been with the state of South Carolina. First in the Guardian ad litem program, and then 5.5 years ago she became the director of the Child's Law Center at the law school in Columbia. She's going to tell us a little bit about children's rights, children's law, and which she knows a great deal about. And Michelle, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you.
Glad to be here. Thank you for the kind introduction. I certainly appreciate it, and I'm glad to be here with all of you. I am a little concerned that Phil told me that law enforcement would be here today. He said, I've invited them just for your presentation. I thought, oh Lord, I think I'm gonna say up there. But I am glad to have the sheriff here and a retired sheriff as well. So anyway, I'm glad to be here with all of you. I presented a few years ago, and so I'm gonna do my best to not completely do the same presentation, but realizing that you may not have been here, you might have missed it. As great of a presentation as it was, I'll try to recap a little bit of that. I am also pleased to see that my father-in-law is still the only one in Rotary without an email address, right? And this is, I gotta tell him a little bit while I'm here. For those of you who've been on the internet, which he may or may not have ever been on the internet, He has not been on the internet, and he loves, and it's one of my fond recollections of him, he loves books and he loves reading, right? And he is always on the hunt for a rare book or a first edition or one that's out of print. And so he'll call or find me at a family gathering and say, Michelle, I got something for you. I need to find this book. Well, since he's never been on the internet, what he doesn't really know much about is Amazon, right? So he is telling me the name of the book, and I usually have my phone right here, and I am on Amazon ordering the book, and I have Prime, so I don't have to pay for the shipping. And I usually can get it to him within 2 or 3 days, landing right on his doorstep. And he thinks I'm pretty amazing because I can do that. So I think I retain my favorite daughter-in-law status because I'm his only daughter-in-law. But so anyway, so I get a chuckle when I come to Rotary, and I think, well, he doesn't have an email. How are they sending him the emails? How does he know when the meetings are? But they're every Thursday at 1, right? So he gets here. He doesn't need to have the emails. So anyway, that's my Phil story. I have more later, but that's one I can tell y'all in public. All right, so I am the director of the Children's Law Center at the University of South Carolina School of Law. There are so many groups, right, both in South Carolina and nationally that work on kids. You know, Kids Count, Children's Trust, right? There's a gazillion children's law centers across the country, right? I wish when we had started in 1995, I wasn't there, we had picked a different name, right? Because there's so many children's law centers. But what we do at the Children's Law Center at the law school is we do a lot of training and resource development and policy work around vulnerable kids, right? Now, arguably all kids are vulnerable, but we're talking a lot about the kids who are kind of on the fringes, right? The kind of kids who may or may not be known to the Department of Social Services, may or may not be known to law enforcement, but are at risk of becoming known to those folks. And while we don't provide direct services, there's lots of children's law centers that have kids as clients, right? They might go to court on the kids' behalf, they might file class action lawsuits. That is not what we do. We try to stay really independent and bring people together to talk. And I'll tell you how we do that in a second. So we have 45 staff members, which is pretty big. Not big, but big for the work that we do. We are funded primarily through like soft money, through contracts and grants. So although we are affiliated with the university, there's not like a line item in the USC budget that's like, oh, this goes to the Children's Law Center. So we get I bring in all my own money. I'm self-supporting, right? So I get all my money from contracts and grants, right? So the federal government, like the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Provision, they give a lot of money to states to do the work we do. We have a contract with the Department of Social Service, the Department of Juvenile Justice, Court Administration, and actually the State Senate to do a lot of the work that we do. So anyway, so that's how we get our funding. And we divide the work into teams, right? So we have 6 teams. One of our teams focuses on juvenile justice issues, right? And so I know that you said I forgot your name. I was trying to remember all the names. Jim, if you had your name tag on. I might remember it. I'm just teasing. That's terrible. I'm teasing. That was not appropriate. Jim was telling me he works in juvenile justice, etc. So we do a lot of work, again, not with kids, but looking at things like, so we do all the training for juvenile correction officers. Within being hired, right, they have to have a legal briefing, they have to talk about use of force and issues like that, so we do all that training. We also right now have a project that we're looking at disproportionate representation. So what you may know is that if there's a child of color, that child is not only more likely to end up in the foster care system, but then they are also more likely to end up in the juvenile justice system, right? And so we do some work in and around that, like what leads to that, why is that appropriate, is that not appropriate? So we do a lot of work around that in our juvenile justice team. We also have a court liaison program. That is not as interesting. I mean, it's important work, not as interesting and as accessible as all the other work we do. But we basically have a staff member who goes to every foster care court proceeding in the state, and they take notes and they help the judge figure out what's going on in the case, and they're working on like ways to prevent delays in the cases, right? So a good example is if there's a father in the case who's incarcerated and has to be transported to the hearing, maybe the attorneys forgot to do the transport order, right? So we're trying to catch those things on the front end because we don't want kids' cases to be impacted by things like that. Third team, we have a joint, we staff, our Senate contract, we staff the Joint Citizens and Legislative Committee on Children. That is a legislative committee that's unique in that it has 3 House members, 3 Senate members, and 3 citizen members. They are also unique in that they go around the state in the fall. There's hearings today where they take public input. I mean, you can always go to Columbia, right, and talk to your legislators there and testify about a bill, but they take public input and that's how they set their legislative agenda. And the 3 representatives, there's not anyone from the 8th Circuit at all, Lawrence, Newberry, Abbeville, or Greenwood, but we have Senator Darrell Jackson from Columbia, Senator Katrina Shealy from Lexington, and Senator Brad Hutto from Orangeburg. And then the representatives on the committee, Representative Neil Collins, he's from the upstate, he's from Easley, I believe. Then we have Representative Mandy Kimmons, she's from the Low Country, and then Representative Beth Bernstein, who's from Columbia. And they work on a broad range of issues, like they might work on like ATV safety for kids or foster care and adoption. One of the big things they're doing right now is looking at kids who received mental health services during COVID, during the pandemic. What's happened is a lot of those kids started to get those services via telehealth, right? Virtually, right? And that was fine. And now that the kids have gone back to school and they're getting mental health services in a school-based setting, like insurance isn't covering it, right? And the distinction for insurance seems to be that they're getting it in the schools so they don't think it counts, right? So these parents are getting these really big bills for mental health services that when it was virtual were paid for. So they're trying to troubleshoot that right now. And they're working very closely with the governor's office on it. And we were just in a meeting about it yesterday. Government Master Business said, like, I don't know what the problem is. I just want it fixed. I don't want parents getting bills. We said, okay, we'll work on that. So, so that's an example. We have a child welfare team. They deal a lot with abuse and neglect. So that's 4 teams, but the 2 teams I want to highlight, right, that I brought handouts for are our mandated reporter training team and our investigations team. So one of the big things we do at the Children's Law Center, and I'll hand some of these out, and if I walk around, just up here. We do all the mandated reporting training for the state of South Carolina. So mandated reporters are people who in their professional capacity, right, if they see abuse or neglect, they're required to report it to either law enforcement or the Department of Social Services, right? So we do, you know, there's examples, I'm handing you out stuff right now. Examples of mandated reporters, physicians, right? So he is wearing a name tag and I didn't remember, I just can't see that part. Dr. Brown, right? If he had seen a child at his practice who he suspected had been physically abused, sexually abused, something like that, he would be required to report that. Nurses are mandated reporters, coaches, teachers, counselors, you name it. So we do all the mandated reporting training for them. Clergy, Mike, our mandated reporter, right? So I remember the guy who reports to God, I got Mike's name, right? But clergy are mandated reporters. That's a little tricky, right? Because there is a clergy, not parishioner, what is the privilege called? It's like people can come to Mike in confidence, right? And that's privileged information. But if someone were to come to him and say, look, I beat up my kid last night, it puts him in an interesting spot as to whether he has to report that information or not, right? So we want people to be able to go to people in faith communities and talk to them, but we also have a duty to kids. So that could be a bit of a challenge for our clergy folk. Anyway, so they do this training all over the state. It's free. We get paid to do it by the Department of Social Services, and it's really, really important work. Some of the more surprising people on this, funeral home directors and undertakers are mandated reporters, right? That's a group I don't necessarily think of, but right, they They might notice something if there's a death, and if it's a death of a child and they have concerns, they are required to report that. Obviously, police, law enforcement, etc. So that's mandated reporting. I gave some handouts about that. All right, then our investigations and prosecution team. That team is really dynamic. All our teams, I feel like, are dynamic. They do all kinds of projects. They basically look at the investigation of child abuse, right? How to investigate it properly. They work with a lot of law enforcement folks to do that, how to properly investigate a child homicide, physical abuse, sexual abuse, etc., as it relates to kids. And they do a lot of that training, which is pretty grim, right? But really, really important. One of the grants we just finished up, and I don't know where you piloted these, Sheriff, but we just finished up a federal grant where we came up with a flagging tool for law enforcement. So these cards we give to law enforcement, right, to help them identify victims of sex trafficking. All right, so victims of sex trafficking, young victims, right? We want law enforcement to be able to help us identify who they are so we can get the right services for that child in place. And so we've developed some tools for law enforcement that we're working on and have gotten some good feedback about. We do some training around it. So what happens, right, and the sheriff might be able to talk probably more realistic, well, not give a presentation on sex trafficking, but has probably been in the work a lot more than I have. I'm pretty removed from it. But what happens a lot of times is like a sex trafficking victim will present, like maybe you're busting up what you think is like a prostitution ring, right? And there are times when the kids and the girls, they might get charged for prostitution, right? Well, you have to take a really close look at that and say, okay, so are they really, like, is it appropriate to charge them as prostitution, or were they forced or coerced into doing that work? And so there's a difference in being like a criminal and a victim, right? And sometimes that can be hard for us to figure out. So we're trying to have law enforcement help us with that, because they're very often the first ones on, oh, the duck, right? We'll be at the race. They're very often the first ones on the scene and trying to sort everything out. And so that's a really big issue in the state, because we don't have a place to put these girls, right, when it happens. So you want to not lock them up, right, or put them at DJJ or put them in jail, because that's very harmful to them, but we don't have anywhere else to go or anywhere else to put them, right? And so we want to protect them from their traffickers. You're welcome to chime in, Sheriff.
I think you're doing good.
Yeah, I am? Okay. Sorry. So it's really tricky. We don't have the capacity, I would say, in the state of South Carolina to really, really deal with this issue, right? I think there are times we think it happens like in Guatemala, right? Or it happens somewhere else, but it happens all along 95, right? It happens in Myrtle Beach, it happens in Columbia, it happens in Atlanta. So it's an issue that's in our communities, why we think it's somewhere else, like I guess a lot of these issues are. But as a result of us generally, like as a collective population, not having awareness about it, so what do you do when you go bust up a prostitution ring and there's like 3 15-year-olds? What do you do with those girls, right? I mean, it can be guys too. Another, not fun fact, but interesting fact, most people think, and this is what we train people on too, that most people think that kids are trafficked by strangers, and that's not the case. They're usually trafficked by a family member or someone they know. So, you know, and you folks, especially with younger kids, right, there's a lot of information you might give them about stranger danger and people who perpetrate and things like that. But most kids, this is taking a real downturn as I'm saying all this out loud, but this is what I do. So that's just like a parenting tip. Yes, you don't want your kids to go with strangers, but if something's gonna happen to them, it's more likely to happen to them from a trusted family member or someone you've brought into your circle. That doesn't mean you shouldn't trust the community or trust people, but just be aware of that. Again, people always think, oh, it's gonna be some guy in a van who drives by and snatches my kid at the bus stop. It's probably not gonna be that situation. It's gonna be someone within your circle. So not to scare you, but there's a great book called Protecting the Gift that was written by an FBI profiler, and it's really a good way to talk about how to let your children have some freedom, but protect them from Great response. Okay, that's kind of grim. One really exciting thing though. We have just completed building, and I'll pass these out. You can take them apart individually. I mean, I didn't staple them, so you could do that. But we have just completed a building renovation of a church. It was a $2.5 million renovation. And we've just built our first ever training center in Columbia. There's pictures of it. They're different pictures still. So they kind of go together, but yeah. So we have just renovated a church in Columbia. It was a First Church of Christian Scientists, because we do all this training and have all these meetings, but we don't have a space to meet in. And so we just completed this project. It was a $2.5 million project. We had generous gift from Joe and Lisa Rice out of Charleston, and the state legislature gave us some funding as well. And it is a training center that has on the top floor a mock courtroom and classroom. That's where we'll do our legal skills training. But the really interesting part is the bottom floor, which we have a mock investigation apartment that was built. It's a 2-bedroom apartment with a bathroom. It's where we will train law enforcement, coroners, caseworkers on how to investigate abuse and neglect, how to investigate child homicide, things like that. And it's really, really cool because it's a completely functional working apartment. We have a bathtub with running water, appliances, washer, dryer, etc. And although law enforcement, they get trained at the Criminal Justice Academy, there are some really, really specific things they might need to look for in children's cases. And so that's the kind of specific training we do there. Also, I don't think you didn't did you invite the coroner today? I hope not. No. Okay, good. Whew. I'd be really worried if you invited the coroner for me today. In any event, we also do a lot of training for coroners. I don't know if you know this, but in South Carolina, coroner's an elected official, but you really just have to get elected. There's no prerequisites to be a coroner. I mean, I think you have to have maybe a GED, but you don't have to necessarily have a medical background. So in some bigger cities, you usually get a coroner who has a medical background, but a lot of smaller places, you don't necessarily have a coroner with a medical background. And so coroners are really, really important when anyone dies, but especially when kids die, right? So we have to train them how to look at the scene, right? And think about it from the sheriff's perspective. Let's say someone's on patrol, right? They get a 911 call, they show up at a house, they show up and there's a dead body, right? What's the first thing, what would they do, Sheriff? If they
Secure the scene.
They would secure the scene, that's great, right? At some point, they would call a detective out, I suppose, right? They would call a detective out. Would they call the coroner?
Coroner, yes.
They call the coroner. So think about all these people who've showed up.
Secure, hold everything in place.
Yes. So think about all these people who've gone to this crime scene now, right? You've got the first person who responded, right? We hope that person has secured it. You've got a detective coming out, right? You've got the coroner coming out, and all of them want to get in there, right, and find out what happened. And probably all of them, probably not on your team.
Not step on each other's toes.
Yes, and not step on each other's toes. Do they sometimes step on each other's toes, Sheriff?
That's probably happened.
Yes, it might have happened a time or two. So, right, so when you think about training and teaching, right, it's like training the coroners, training law enforcement. Again, they get it at the Criminal Justice Academy, right? But training them more in depth, like who's going to do what? Who's going to be the lead? Let's not contaminate the crime scene. What are we looking for? Things like that. And evidence in these cases, it's not like you see on TV always, right? In child abuse cases, the evidence can be a little bit different than other cases. So for example, sometimes you have an abuse case where there's a target child, right? So maybe a family has 3 kids. 2 of the kids are fine, but they always beat up or abuse the 3rd kid, right? So that can be really hard to prove. I mean, of course, if the child has injuries, you can prove that, right? But if the other 2 go to school, present well, they're feeding them, maybe they're making good grades, this family can present really well to law enforcement, to DSS, and you don't know what is it about this 3rd child? How can we show that? And the parents are saying, oh, Tommy just falls a lot. He's really clumsy. I don't know how he bashed his head in. Whatever they're telling you, right? Well, one of the things we teach people to do is to look around the home, right? A lot of times when there's a target child, there won't be any pictures of that child in the home. You'll see pictures of mom and dad and the 2 at the beach, the other kids, but what you have to train people to see what's not there, right? Is what is potentially not having a picture of the target child. I don't know if that's a great example, but that's one we use. One of the interesting things about the investigation house is we're having to stage it for crimes. And so that's going to be a little tricky. We might have to borrow some evidence from the evidence room, because you can't, right, you can't take your university credit card and go buy drug paraphernalia. At least I don't think you can. But the cool.
Go out to Oregon somewhere like that.
Pardon?
Go out to Oregon or something.
In Oregon, yes. If we were in Colorado or California, we'd be fine. But so the house is kind of a grim topic. It's really, really neat. We have a lot of capacity to do a lot of different things for people, and we're excited and would love to have folks on your team, sheriff, come at some point. And anyone really, if you're ever in Columbia, call me and I'll show. I mean, I give like 4 tours a day of this place now. I gave 2 this week already, but okay, so that's a nutshell. I could talk all afternoon. I want to be thoughtful of everyone's time. I'm happy to answer questions that you may have. I know I talked fast, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about the work or kids.
I know.
Sheriff? Yes.
Now, the only thing I want to say is what you do is so emotional and so heartfelt. It takes a passion to do what
It does.
you do.
I definitely feel called to do the work, but also blessed that I have the capacity to do the work. I could be at a big firm making a lot more money.
You mentioned the word dark a while ago. Well, most of what you do with the dark, unfortunately, you have to look for the light.
You do have to look for the light, but what I think it helps for me personally that I'm several steps removed, right? Like if I had to go into a house every day and find kids in awful situations, that would be hard. I did that kind of court work for a long time, so it helps me now that I'm a couple steps removed from it. But it's still hard work, for sure. But meaningful, right? You gotta make the world better than you find it.
But you might, just to like quick, we had an incident 6 months ago where we had 2 children we took out of the home.
Mm-hmm.
Now, both of our beautiful little children with a little girl, all of a sudden we began to say they wanted to fight for the little girl.
Oh.
They didn't care if we kept the little boy. Then we got to noticing the clothing and the toys. I mean, everything was so, he didn't get treated, he didn't get spat out of the same spot the little girl did.
Oh, that's terrible.
Very sad, very sad. He had been living like that. He was kind of pushed aside.
Mm-hmm.
And he really wasn't visibly abused, but you could tell he kept running away. Little Tot, there's something going on, little Tot keep leaving now. But he was getting pushed aside.
So that's exactly a good example of a target child, not getting physically abused, but emotional
He was
abuse
mentally
to that
abused.
child.
She had buku stuff. You know what I mean?
Oh, gosh. Do you know what happened? Did the kids go back home, or?
Actually, at the moment, they were both in a home together. And I hope they can stay together, but I don't know if
Yeah,
they're going to be
it's
able to
hard.
or not. Yeah.
I've seen in foster care cases back when I practiced in the courts where a biological mom will fight for one kid and not the other. And I don't fully understand that as a parent.
It's sad to watch the child's, facial expression.
But it is. I mean, I as a parent, you don't have a favorite kid, right? But to see a parent who does or fights for one, or maybe you do. I don't know. He might have a favorite kid. I was thinking about that.
That grin.
I was looking at him.
I was listening to her.
I like to say to my kids, like they're just like flavors of ice cream. You're both good, just a little different flavor.
And the answer is it all depends on the day.
Yes. But it's all right. I'm very thankful I'm not on the front lines anymore. But all the work we do does try to support those folks and give them the tools they need to make it better for our kids in this specific way. But there's needs everywhere, right? I really wish we could do more on the front end right, and that's a whole nother, right? 3 Rotary presentations, right? Yes.
I know fatherless homes make a huge difference.
Yes.
Is there any, I know this is like a random question, but is there anything else as a society that if we could attack would make a big difference as far as helping these kids?
So sure. So absent fathers, right? Like the trajectory for a kid who doesn't grow up in a 2-parent home is like, it's terrible, regardless of your socioeconomic status, right? So it's not good. So obviously mentoring programs, which I know probably some of you do. I know Phil has done mentoring before. So that's helped, just male role models. I think another big issue, Phil and I were talking about this on the way up, food insecurity, right? I mean, you gotta, think about if you go to school hungry, let's pretend your home is fine, right? You got a mom, dad, everything's good, but you can't eat. How do you learn on an empty stomach, right? Think about it, I get a little bit cranky when I'm hungry. So if you don't have food to eat, so the backpack program that y'all are doing in Rotary is great. I think a lot more could be done with affordable housing, right? I don't think we should build a bunch of projects or government subsidize, like a ton of subsidized housing, but how to figure that out. If you look at the numbers in Columbia, to rent an apartment, like a 2-bedroom apartment in Columbia is more than we pay on our mortgage, right? And so I don't know this, I don't have the finance mind or the real estate mind to solve that, but we've got to figure that out. I don't know how you do it, because you can, so I think there's a group of people who just don't work and are lazy or whatever, fine, put them there. But I think there's a large part of our population that you would call the working poor, right? And they're working a job, or they're working 2 jobs or 3 jobs, and they still can't, by the time they buy groceries and pay rent, they still can't pay other things. If I could solve that, right? So I didn't answer it, but like food, housing, food, clothing, shelter, right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Once you get those needs met, you can pretty much do anything. And government can't fix it. I mean, government has to step in to fill the gap, but government can't fix this. I think they can help, but it's on some level like a heart, like we're really broken now I'm preaching, right? We're just really broken. We're a very broken world that we live in. And so, what we can do on an individual level helps a lot too. Neighborhoods, at the end of the day, keep kids safe, right? So you think, DSS comes or law enforcement comes, but if you have a neighbor who looks out for you as a kid or another adult, you'll be much safer as a kid. Oh, another great one, y'all do this too. Another data point, grade level reading. If kids are not reading on grade level by 3rd grade, their trajectory is terrible. So, and the reason for that is because in 3rd grade, you start reading to learn instead of learning to read. So if you can do anything with early childhood and getting kids to read on grade level by 3rd grade, they'll be substantially more successful in school. Anyway, save the world, yes.
Do you do any training for school guidance counselors?
We do. The school guidance counselor training is primarily the mandated reporter training, but that's mostly, we just teach them how to identify abuse and neglect and things like that, some child development stuff as well. Do you have connections to the schools? He's probably like the superintendent. Probably, right?
I'm the designee of the superintendent.
Oh, you are, so that, right? That's even better than the superintendent. Yes?
You pointed out how important the male is in the family.
Yes.
That runs into all creatures,
Right.
In South Africa about 20 years ago, they had young elephants, male elephants, didn't have any old males in there, and they were running around and killing all the rhinoceros and things like that.
Really?
And so the solution the Swedish scientists had, they even went up there to get some, they brought a bunch, about 6 male elephants in there, and they beat the young elephants up till they got back in.
Got back in line.
They made them sit straighten out, and that stopped it.
Wow.
So they just, made sure there wasn't any just youthful elephants in them.
Right. There you go. So so what a great metaphor though.
You think that would be working in human?
Well, so we couldn't, we wouldn't want the guys to come in and beat up the kids, but we certainly want more guys around and engaged with kids.
Use the word discipline.
Discipline, yes, discipline. That's why too, right? Like male teachers, I think, are so important.
Yes.
I know it's a career that is traditionally women have, but anytime I see a male teacher in the all teachers need to be thanked. They are doing an amazing job. They always do, and they are in COVID. But anytime you see or hear of a man in teaching, that is huge, especially in the public schools. because that's another male influence on those kids. It's important in private school too.
Sorry, I use that word, beat them up.
Well, it's okay.
Discipline is
Yeah, discipline, right, so that, you get mentor, Mike tells how to fix marriages and people having babies and not being married and all that. That's another Rotary Club presentation, people having kids before they need to be having kids. And I say that without judgment, I don't mean that, that happens, but, anyway.
Any comment on the change at Department of JJ?
Okay, so yes, if you're keeping up, the Freddie Pugh, the director of DJJ, resigned, or was probably asked to resign. I obviously think it's a good thing. DJJ is on fire. It's terrible. I have friends who work in state government and who are going in and auditing the HR. DJJ was a disaster. I don't know how it got that bad. I don't know why people didn't realize it was that bad, but my interesting connection to that is the acting director, Eden Hendrick, is a colleague and friend of mine. I used to be her boss, and my son was her kid's driver this summer, drove her kids around. So I've got an inside track to DJJ. I think she's got a lot on her plate to fix. I don't know if she'll be there short term or long term, but I'm glad there's at least some different leadership. I didn't know Freddie Pugh very well, but sounds like a nightmare over there, right? There have been staff walkouts, their kids, it's a hornet's nest.
Michelle,
Yes, sir.
before you finish, I want to put in a plug for a book that anybody would be interested in, anybody in this room, written back in the 70s by a psychiatrist named Scott Peck,
Oh,
The Road Less Traveled.
okay.
And two things about it. First of all, he's a psychiatrist, and the foundation of this book is on his a record of his individual cases, people he's helped, and it's a reconciliation of science and religion, the importance of both, and he talks throughout about the importance of childhood and how childhood really is the beginning of a successful or a disappointing life. And if anybody's got extra time to read something, it's really worth reading. Well written. Scott Peck, The Road Less Traveled.
It's available on Amazon for $9.79. Right here to City Hall. That's a great recommendation and a great segue, right? So, we incarcerate a lot of people. We build a lot of prisons, right? We spend a lot of money taking care of prisoners, right? And there should be consequences, right? There are people who need to be locked up, but we don't spend as much money or focus or energy on our kids, right? And it's much easier to build healthy kids than repair broken adults. So, for what that's worth, that's probably a great time to that book. And if kids don't grow up, you can fix it later, but their brain architecture is forming from 0 to 3, right? So if we mess that up, if a kid cries and you don't feed the kid or you don't change their diaper, it completely rewires the kid's brain. So I'll get off my soapbox about that. But thank you for what y'all do too. Your selfless service, right? Y'all are community members investing in your own communities. You're doing of your own free will. You're not, you're raising money, you're giving out backpacks, you're reading with kids, and we need more folks like you doing it. Unfortunately, I think there's a decline of service clubs these days. I don't know if that's just the social media or the age we live in, but I do worry a little that as people get older, that some of these service organizations will fade away, and we don't need that, and I don't know how you fix that, but I hope y'all keep on doing what you're doing, because we need people to do it.
I'll let you know that later in the year, we're considering doing Reach Out and Read. helping another organization that doesn't, but reach out and read where they get the book when they go to the doctor.
Oh, I love that. You know, there's barbers, right, in the African American community who will, when kids go to get their haircuts, they read with them or make sure the kids read a book, which is really cool. Yeah, any organization you can partner with or help. I know United Way does a lot of work around reading. But y'all know, I'm talking to the right people, right? We need to figure out who the people are at the table missing. We need to inspire them to make a difference in their own communities. All right. Well, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure being here.
Thank you for coming. Thank you. We appreciate what you do. Chris and Don, thank you for coming today too. Michelle,
Oh, yes. Thank you.
No, you're fine. It's interesting you talk about reading. We donated a book with to a local elementary school.
Oh,
If
I
you
love
want to go
that.
and sign it for us.
Oh, goodness. Thank you. I will. Thank you. Oh, beautiful.
Chris and Don, thank you for coming. Any other announcements? They signed up for the duck races. Where is that for the table to sell ducks? Over there somewhere. Just try to make sure everybody signs up for that for a spot. Any other announcements?
Good.
If not, we'll do the four-way test. Can you stand for the four-way test? Is it the truth?
Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and friendships?
Can we get off thing there?
Hey, wow, we messed it up.
Yeah. Is it the truth? Sir.
Fair to all concerned.
Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? What's our motto?
Service above self.
Okay. Hey, Ray, what is that?